Hey guys, I'm Mallory, but my friends call me Mel, and I'm not afraid of anything at all. That's why my life has changed so drastically. When I was a kid, I was a scaredy cat. I remember a time when my class and I went to the zoo. All the kids stopped at a cage with a tiger. The teacher said that it would appear any minute and we had to wait. But several minutes passed and the tiger never showed up. I felt bad and a terrible thought occurred to me. I shouted, "The tiger has escaped!" I shrieked and ran away to hide. The children started pointing and laughing at me. Then the sleepy tiger came out of his cave, but nobody paid any attention to him because it was more interesting to laugh at me. After this embarrassing incident, I was given the nickname Chicken, and they had reasons for it. For example, if I heard a loud noise, I hid immediately. But the most embarrassing situation happened to me in high school. That time, the principal had a brilliant idea to have a fire drill and not warn the students. I was standing at the board and was answering the teacher's questions when suddenly I smelled a faint whiff of smoke. Immediately after that, the fire alarm went off. The teacher said in a calm tone of voice, "Everyone, please follow me." What? Don't you understand? There's a fire! My heart began to race. I jumped up and ran to the window. I could see the fire trucks already parked outside the entrance, and the firefighters themselves were spreading hoses and preparing ladders. Our class was lucky that we were on the first floor. Without thinking, I grabbed a heavy chair. "No, Mel, listen." "Listen to what? There's a fire. Everybody needs to get out." I threw that chair right through the window. The glass shattered into tiny pieces. The whole class was terrified to see what I'd done. "Follow me." After saying that, I didn't even look to see if anyone had followed me. I just jumped out the window. There were firemen working outside. Without wasting a minute, I waved toward the broken window and shouted, "There's a fire!" The firefighters who had been lazy before suddenly sped up. They rushed into the building, and I, feeling safe now, watched the rescue operation from outside. After only a few minutes, the director came out. He was covered in foam from head to toe. Behind him appeared a perplexed fireman holding a metal bucket. Inside the bucket was a pair of burnt pieces of paper, which, it turned out, had been burnt by our principal to create the smell of smoke. The principal gave me a very angry look. I thought for sure now I was going to be expelled from the school. But I was lucky. The city administration stood up for me, arguing that fire drills should not be conducted without proper training, but I still got a big blowout from my parents. After all, they had to pay for the broken glass. But the worst thing was that after that incident, everyone stopped talking to me. They didn't even call me any names. The children didn't want anything to do with me, thinking I was crazy. I had to get a job to help my parents pay the money. It was a very difficult time in my life. I didn't have any friends left, and my parents were angry that I was always embarrassing them. I got depressed, and I didn't want anything except to get rid of this eternal habit of being afraid of everything. One day, while I was walking in the park, I saw a rather high mountain, about 3 meters high. Heights were the thing I was most afraid of, so I decided that if I could conquer that fear, I could handle the others easily. I slowly crept to the edge of the cliff, one step at a time, until I felt there was nowhere else to go. "Just don't look down" is the motto of anyone who's afraid of heights. But today I was going to break it. I lowered my gaze. I had done it for nothing. Fear was deceiving me. And it seemed to me that there were not 3 meters, but 10. My whole body was shaking, and I couldn't even take a step back. I just stood on the edge of the cliff, and I was trembling. Suddenly, the edge of the ground beneath my feet crumbled. My body was pulled forward, and I flew down. I woke up late at night. The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes was a starry sky. My head was pounding with pain. I struggled to get up and walked home. In the morning, my head still hurt, but not as much. I was glad that nothing bad had happened. Yes, it had been a stupid thing to do, but it didn't seem to have caused any serious injuries. I took a couple of pills for my head. I went to work because of that broken window. I was standing behind the cash register, punching in someone's purchase, when suddenly a suspicious-looking guy walked into the store. He looked around, then he put his hand in his jacket pocket and with quick but uncertain steps headed for the cash register. "Take everything out of the cash register and put it in the bag." "I'm not going to." Then the man pulled out his gun and pointed it at me. "I'm not kidding. Put the money in the bag." I looked closely at the gun. I'd already seen one on my brother. He used to scare me with it. It looked like a real one, but it was just a toy. I answered in a calm voice, "Sir, I pressed the panic button under my desk. The police will be here soon. You'd better put your toy down and surrender." The robber became very nervous. Droplets of sweat appeared on his forehead. He took off, ran for the exit, and disappeared behind the doors of the store. He returned a few minutes later, but he was already handcuffed. Behind him, I saw the police officers. One of them praised me for my courage. A little later, reporters arrived at the scene. They interviewed me. "How did you manage to stay calm?" "I just wasn't scared." "I just wasn't scared." Those words struck me like a bolt of lightning. I wasn't even afraid when they pointed a gun at my face. How is that possible? I'm afraid of everything in the world. There must be something wrong with me. And so it turned out. Some scientist watched the reportage, and he was very interested in my atypical reaction to an armed robber. So the very next morning, the ringing could be heard in my room. "Mallory Richards? I'm Professor Campbell. I saw the report about the robbery you prevented, and I'd like to examine your brain." "My brain?" "Exactly. Tell me, have you noticed anything strange about yourself lately?" "Yes, Professor. I've really changed." "If you are as curious as I am as to why this has happened, come to the address today." I took my pen and began to write down the address of the research center. Without a moment's hesitation, I headed there. Professor Campbell was very happy to see me. He said he wanted to undergo a full medical examination. Wanting to find out what had happened, I agreed. A few days later, the professor summoned me back to his office. He threw some pictures on the table and pointed to one of them. "Tell me, Mallory, did you have any head injuries?" I smiled embarrassedly. "I think so." "Why do you ask?" "You have a damaged amygdala, which is responsible for fear. In other words, you're not afraid of anything." Oh wow, I didn't think that was even possible. The doctor said he wanted to give me a couple of tests. He claimed it would be very helpful in his new research. I wondered what was wrong with me too. So I agreed. The professor and a group of scientists started, in their opinion, with the simplest thing. They took me to an exotic animal store. Behind the glass walls of the aquarium sat huge snakes. Professor Campbell pointed to a small one. I shook my head and pointed to the biggest one. The salesman was very surprised, but he didn't argue. He pulled out a 3-meter-long snake and placed it right on my shoulders. I could feel the reptile slowly braiding my body, barely squeezing my muscles, but I felt no fear. Rather, curiosity played in me. At one point, I got interested in it. "Can I pet the tarantula?" "I don't think so." "But he's so cute." The professor shook his head negatively, realizing that dangerous animals wouldn't scare me. The scientists came up with something new. The professor locked me in a dark room. On a huge screen appeared the image of an old mansion. The announcer's voice told me that the house was built on an old cemetery. Everyone who lived in it or visited it died or disappeared without a trace. The souls of these people still wandered in the house in search for peace. The recording stopped abruptly. A professor entered the room. "I suppose you know where we're going." "To a haunted house?" "That's right. We'll ask you to spend the night there." I've avoided adventure all my life. Therefore, I was craving for it, so I would agree on dinosaurs and aliens and all sorts of other stuff. The professor's car stopped on a dark street. He gave me a backpack with food and a flashlight, and then he hit the gas and drove off. It was an old mansion on the outskirts of town. I went into the house, turned on the flashlight, and looked around. The floorboards were rotten and creaky. The windows were broken, which made the house awfully cold. There were cobwebs everywhere. To sum up, everything was as it would be in a haunted house. To be honest, I quickly got bored because there was nothing to do, so I just fell asleep on a small couch. I was awakened by a huge cuckoo clock. The cuckoo appeared and disappeared in the clock. It struck exactly 12 times. It got a little uncomfortable. I heard creaking sound. A man in a tuxedo was descending the stairs. The man held a tray in his hands with a lid on it. When he came down, I could see a faint white glow emanating from him. And best of all, he had no head. Here I didn't know how to react. Logically, I should run, but why should I if I wasn't scared? So there was no danger from this ghost. I let the spirit get closer. He was already standing beside me. The headless ghost grabbed the lid and lifted it. His own head was on the plate. I was very surprised, and I wanted to know more about the creature. Then I reached out my hand to touch the ghost, but my fingers went through it, and the ghost began to shake like a bad picture on TV. Suddenly, a light went on in the whole house, and a familiar voice came out. "Okay, turn off the projection. That girl isn't afraid of anything." The ghost vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. From somewhere around the corner came the professor himself. Professor Campbell? What was that? "We wanted to scare you a little, but it didn't work." The professor adjusted his glasses and asked me to be very careful. Without my instinct for self-preservation, I could put myself in grave danger. I took part in some more of the professor's research, which I hope will help people who have the uncontrollable fear I once had before I fell off a cliff. The professor advised me to look for an occupation where I would use my new abilities. I couldn't imagine what that might be until I saw an ad online of a stunt school. Well, of course, that's where my fearlessness could come in handy. When at the first lesson, I, without a second of doubt, jumped from a height in a pile of cardboard boxes. The instructors, stuntmen with experience, opened their mouths in amazement. They said they had never seen such a brave girl. So from Chicken, I was renamed Daredevil. And you know, I like that nickname a lot better. What's your biggest fear? Would you like to get rid of those fears? Tell us in the comments. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next interesting story.